A single corridor is quietly controlling billions of dollars in trade. Not a massive ocean, not a global war, just one narrow system of sea lanes and rail lines, stretching across the Baltic. If it slows down, even slightly, factories across Europe begin to feel it. Energy prices react, supply chains hesitate. And here's the unsettling part. This isn't a future risk. It's already happening. But most of Europe hasn't fully realized it yet. The Baltic Sea looks calm on the surface, bordered by major economies like Poland and Germany and shadowed by Russia's Kaliningrad enclave. It has long been one of Europe's most reliable trade corridors. For decades, it functioned as a seamless bridge. Energy shipments flowed in, containers moved efficiently, rail lines connected Asia to Europe through Poland, feeding directly into the EU's industrial core. At the same time, Belarus acted as a crucial land bridge for rail freight, linking China's exports to European markets through a stable and predictable route. Everything was optimized for speed, for reliability, for scale. But that system is starting to tighten, quietly, without headlines. Russia, positioned at both the maritime and rail edges of this corridor, is beginning to exert influence, not through direct conflict, but through control of movement. And in global logistics, control of movement is everything. In recent months, activity in the Baltic has changed, not dramatically, but noticeably. Russian vessels have increased their presence, not aggressive warships, but surveillance ships, monitoring traffic patterns. Drones have appeared over key shipping lanes. Signals interference has been reported by passing vessels. Nothing that triggers alarm immediately, but enough to create uncertainty. And uncertainty is expensive. Shipping companies begin to factor in risk. Insurance premiums climb. Routes are reconsidered. Each decision is small, but together they start to slow the system down. On land, the pressure is building too. Rail routes that once moved seamlessly through Poland, especially via Warsaw and Łódź, are showing signs of friction. Operators face more inspections, more unpredictability, more hesitation. Freight that used to move with precision now faces delays, not catastrophic, but consistent. And in logistics, consistency is what keeps the system alive. Meanwhile, early signals are emerging at ports in Poland. Throughput isn't collapsing, but it's declining, slowly, steadily. Enough to make supply chain managers uncomfortable, because they've seen this pattern before. Small disruptions that grow into systemic problems. But here's where the situation shifts. This isn't just passive pressure, it's active positioning. Russia isn't only monitoring the system, it's building an alternative. Enter Ust-Luga, a developing port complex near Kaliningrad, designed not just to handle cargo, but to redirect the flow of trade itself. This isn't about increasing capacity, it's about changing direction. Rail lines from deep within Russia are being extended and integrated, creating a direct link from inland networks to Baltic shipping routes. That means freight coming from Asia, especially from China, can bypass traditional European entry points. Instead of flowing through Poland's rail hubs, cargo can move directly through Russian-controlled infrastructure and onto ships bound for Europe. A complete rerouting. And industry players are starting to notice. Freight that once depended on Polish corridors is now exploring alternatives. Some shipments are being redirected south through Central Asia and across the Caspian Sea. This is known as the Middle Corridor. It's longer, more complex, but it avoids the growing uncertainty in the north. Others are shifting even further, taking maritime routes from the Black Sea to Adriatic ports. Again, slower, more expensive, but more predictable. And in global trade, predictability often matters more than speed. Even northern routes through Scandinavia are being reconsidered. The result? The Baltic, once considered Europe's safest and most efficient maritime corridor, is becoming a pressure point. And Poland, historically positioned as a critical gateway, is starting to lose its advantage, not suddenly, but steadily. So what's really happening here? Think of global logistics as a circulatory system. Goods are the blood, routes are the arteries, and choke points? They're blockages, not complete shutdowns, just enough resistance to slow everything down. Ust-Luga, increased surveillance, rail rerouting, these aren't isolated developments. They're part of a larger shift, a quiet constriction of Europe's supply flow, and the impact goes far beyond logistics. Even without a single shot fired, the consequences are real. Costs rise, delays increase, energy becomes less stable, and influence begins to shift. Here's a simple way to understand it. Imagine you're delivering critical medical supplies. There's one main road. Now suddenly, there's construction. Another road is open, but it's longer, and someone else is monitoring the main road, deciding when traffic slows. You can still deliver, but now it costs more. It takes longer, and you're no longer in control. That's exactly what's happening across Europe's trade network, and this is only the beginning. For years, rail freight from China to Europe represented the perfect balance. Faster than sea, cheaper than air, and most importantly, predictable. Trains moved across Central Asia, passed through Belarus, entered Poland, and distributed across Europe. Cities like Warsaw and Łódź became critical nodes in this system. They weren't just transit points, they were gateways. But that system is now under pressure. As tensions rise in the Baltic and control tightens along key routes, companies are rethinking everything. Because in logistics, dependence is risk. And right now, too much of Europe's trade depends on corridors that are no longer fully neutral. So alternatives are emerging. The middle corridor is one of them. Freight moves through Kazakhstan, crosses the Caspian Sea, continues through Azerbaijan and Georgia, and enters Europe via the Balkans. It's slower, it involves multiple transfers, but it reduces exposure to geopolitical pressure. Then there's the southern route. Cargo moves via the Black Sea into Mediterranean and Adriatic ports. Again, longer transit times, higher costs, but increased control. And in uncertain environments, control becomes a premium. Meanwhile, something else is happening. Ust-Luga is not just another port, it's a strategic pivot point. By connecting Russia's internal rail networks directly to Baltic shipping lanes, it creates a closed-loop system, one that can operate independently of traditional European hubs. This changes the game entirely, because now Russia isn't just part of the route, it becomes the route. So what does this mean for Europe? First, volume shifts. Ports in Poland begin to lose throughput. Not dramatically at first, but enough to signal change. Rail hubs that once handled massive flows of goods are seeing reduced activity. Less volume means higher cost per unit, and that cost gets passed down the chain. European companies begin to feel it. Longer transit times, more complex routing, higher logistics expenses. Energy markets are affected too. Delays in LNG and oil shipments create volatility, and industries that rely on just-in-time delivery, automotive, manufacturing, electronics, face growing pressure. Delays ripple outward, production slows, prices increase, consumers feel the impact, all from a shift that most people never see, because it doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like inefficiency, but inefficiency at scale is a crisis. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The same infrastructure creating disruption also creates opportunity for China. By leveraging Russian rail networks and ports like Ust-Luga, Chinese exporters gain a new pathway into Europe, one that bypasses traditional EU-controlled corridors. Even in a fragmented system, goods can still flow, just through different hands. Russia, in this scenario, plays a dual role. On one side, it acts as a disruptor, introducing friction into existing routes. On the other, it becomes a facilitator, offering alternative pathways under its control. That dual role is powerful because it allows control over access, not total control, but enough to influence outcomes. And in global trade, influence is often more valuable than dominance. Meanwhile, Europe faces a subtle shift in power. Poland and other EU logistics hubs lose strategic importance. Russia gains leverage, and China gains resilience. A new balance begins to form. So where does this lead? Europe is approaching a decision point. It can invest in alternative corridors, strengthen southern and central routes, diversify ports and infrastructure, or it can remain dependent on pathways that are increasingly influenced by external forces. There's no immediate collapse, no sudden breakdown, but there is a gradual shift, one that increases costs, reduces control, and reshapes the flow of global trade. Poland's role as a central gateway is no longer guaranteed, and the Baltic is no longer a neutral space. The hidden truth? Logistics isn't just about moving goods. It's about power, leverage, and control. And right now, that control is being quietly redistributed.